My mother-in-law told my husband to leave me, saying, "She's not good enough for our family." I smiled and walked away. When she discovered I owned everything she had schemed for, it was already too late. The moment my mother-in-law ruined her son's life came wrapped in pearls and a glass of expensive champagne. It was a warm Sunday afternoon, and I was clearing the table after a family brunch when she leaned in, her voice a practiced whisper, honeyed with faux concern. "Claire, dear, let's not drag this out. You need to leave my son." I froze. The silverware in my hands suddenly felt heavier. Across the room, my husband, Daniel, laughed at something his father said, utterly unaware of the bomb his mother had just dropped in our kitchen. "You've had your fun," she continued smoothly, adjusting the diamond bracelet on her wrist. "But you must see it, don't you? You're not the right fit for our family." Not good enough. I had heard it before. The subtle jabs at my upbringing, the veiled insults about my lack of sophistication, the way she always managed to introduce me as Claire, Daniel's wife, never acknowledging me beyond that. But today, she wasn't hiding behind careful wording. Today, she was making her move. "You don't have the right background," she pressed on. "No prestigious family name, no valuable connections. A woman like you only holds a man like Daniel back." I exhaled slowly, setting the plates down with precision. She mistook my silence for submission. "Don't look so surprised, dear," she continued, a condescending smile curling her lips. "Daniel will remarry. We'll find someone more suitable for him. Someone with the right family, the right class. You understand, don't you?" Ah, so that was it. This wasn't just an insult. It was an ultimatum. Daniel's mother had decided my time was up. She expected me to crumble, to be humiliated, to pack my bags and slink away quietly while she picked out a new, better wife for her precious son. I smiled. Not the smile of a woman defeated, but the kind of smile that should have made her uneasy. "I understand perfectly." Then, without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, confused by my lack of resistance. She had no idea. No idea that the house she loved to parade around in, the one with the marble countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows, wasn't Daniel's. No idea that the thriving business she had always belittled, dismissing it as my little project, had outgrown Daniel's entire career. No idea that the money she so effortlessly enjoyed, the luxury vacations, the extravagant gifts, had come, not from their family's wealth, but from the empire I had built from scratch. She thought she had won. She had no idea she had already lost. That night, I didn't tell Daniel about his mother's little suggestion. I didn't have to, because while she was busy scheming to push me out, she had no idea that she was standing in a house that didn't belong to her. Literally. Our mansion, the one she adored showing off to her friends, the one she believed was Daniel's achievement, was mine. I had bought it before we were even married. In my name. With my money. I had allowed Daniel to put on the show, to let his mother believe that he had provided this life for us. But in truth, his paycheck barely covered the property taxes. It was all mine. And the moment she decided I was disposable, she had sealed her own fate. Over the next few weeks, my mother-in-law became increasingly bold. She dropped hints to Daniel, her words sugar-coated in concern. "Claire just doesn't understand our lifestyle, sweetheart. Wouldn't you be happier with someone who truly fits in?" It's not her fault, of course. She was raised differently. But let's be realistic here. I watched as Daniel, oblivious as ever, laughed off her comments, never suspecting the storm brewing beneath the surface. Then came the final push. One evening, I overheard a hushed conversation between Daniel and his mother in the next room. "She's not right for you," she urged. "You've given her enough. It's time to move on." And then, the moment of truth. "If you divorce her now, I'll make sure you walk away with everything." I nearly laughed out loud. She thought she had power over me. She had no idea. That night, as I lay in bed beside my husband, the man who had unknowingly let his mother declare war on our marriage, I realized something. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I was just amused. Because the truth was, they had already lost. They just didn't know it yet. The first crack in Daniel's perfect world came the next morning at breakfast. I sat across from him, sipping my coffee, watching as he scrolled through his phone with his usual distracted ease. He had no idea what his mother had set in motion the night before. No idea that the battle had already begun. "You're quiet today," he mused, glancing up from his screen. "Everything okay?" I smiled. Everything's perfect. And it was. Because I had made my decision. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't even going to fight. I was going to let them win. Or at least, let them think they had won. Because what's more satisfying than defeating your enemy? Letting them dig their own grave first. By mid-afternoon, I received the first text. It was from my mother-in-law. "Daniel and I had a lovely lunch today. He agrees it's time to move forward." Time to move forward. Ah, she thought she was already in control. I took a sip of wine, letting the message sit unanswered for a while. I wanted her to feel confident. Overconfident. 2 hours later, another message arrived. "I hope you understand, Claire. This is what's best for everyone." I chuckled. Best for everyone? No, Margaret. It was only best for you. But I played my part. "Of course," I texted back. "I understand perfectly." She must have nearly dropped her champagne flute. I imagined her delight. Probably calling her friends, telling them how effortlessly she had removed me from her son's life. I could practically hear her gloating. She took it so well. She knows her place. Finally, Daniel can be with someone worthy of our family. Oh, Margaret. She truly had no idea. That evening, Daniel arrived home later than usual. He hesitated in the doorway, as if weighing his words. Good. He was feeling guilty already. "Hey, babe," he started. "Can we talk?" Here it was. "Of course," I said, sitting down on the couch. He sat next to me, rubbing his hands together, his classic nervous tic. God, he was predictable. I think we should separate," he finally said. I tilted my head, pretending to process his words. "Oh? It's just, we want different things," he explained, using the same rehearsed lines every cheater, liar, and coward has used since the dawn of time. "Who's we?" I asked, just for fun. A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. He wasn't used to me being so calm. He had probably expected tears, anger, some kind of outburst. But all I did was smile. "If that's what you want, Daniel," I said smoothly. He blinked. "Wait, you're not upset? Why would I be?" He searched my face, confused. This wasn't the reaction he had been expecting. You don't want to fight for our marriage?" "Should I?" I asked, standing up. "It seems you've already made up your mind." I walked into our bedroom, grabbed a suitcase, and placed it on the bed. "I'll give you some space," I said. "I'll stay somewhere else for a while." The look on his face was priceless. "Claire, wait. I don't mean you have to leave tonight. I just meant—" But I was already packing. Let him think I was hurt. Let him think I was heartbroken. Let him think he was in control. Little did he know. I was leaving, all right. I was leaving him in the exact position his mother had wanted. Completely free. But freedom? It was about to cost him everything. I stayed at a luxury hotel that night. The same one my mother-in-law had once bragged about hosting charity events in. The irony was almost poetic. I took my time, ordering champagne, sitting by the window overlooking the city skyline, enjoying the quiet. Tomorrow, Margaret would wake up believing she had won. Daniel would believe he was moving forward, unburdened by me. But by the time they discovered what they had truly lost, it would already be too late. Margaret must have woken up feeling victorious. I imagined her sipping her morning coffee in that sunlit dining room, basking in the glow of her triumph. She had done it. She had erased me. She had removed the woman she believed was unworthy of her precious son. In her mind, the next phase had already begun. She would find Daniel a new wife, one who came from the right background, someone she could mold, control, own. And as for me, I was supposed to be broken, miserable, a cautionary tale of what happens to women who forget their place. I smiled at the thought. She had no idea. No idea that while she was basking in her victory, her world was about to crumble. That morning, Daniel learned his first hard lesson. I got a text from him around 10 a.m. "Claire, we need to talk. Something's wrong with the house?" I didn't reply. By noon, my phone buzzed again. "Why is the bank saying my name isn't on the mortgage? Call me." Ah, there it is. It had taken him less than 24 hours to realize what he had truly lost. But I wasn't done yet. I let the messages pile up, his confusion turning to frustration, then panic. At 3 p.m., my lawyer sent me a simple text. He called. "He's realizing the truth. Let me know when you want to respond." Not yet. Let him stew. It wasn't until the following evening that Margaret herself became aware of the disaster. I was in my hotel room enjoying a quiet dinner when my lawyer forwarded me another message. "Margaret just called. She's furious. She claims there's been a mistake." I could almost hear her shrill voice. "What do you mean my son's name isn't on the house?" She must have insisted it was an oversight. A paperwork error. After all, in her mind, everything Daniel had must belong to him. Except it didn't. Not the house, not the investments, not even the business she had mocked for years. I took another sip of wine. She would soon learn that the real mistake had been underestimating me. By the time Daniel and his mother demanded answers, I was ready. I met them at the house. The one Margaret had once loved calling their family estate. Daniel was already waiting in the driveway, arms crossed, pacing. Margaret was beside him, her carefully polished poise beginning to crack. "Claire," Daniel said, "we need to talk." "Do we?" I said, stepping out of the car with slow, deliberate ease. "Yes," his mother snapped. "There's been a mistake. The bank is saying this house is in your name." "That's not a mistake," I replied smoothly. Silence. Margaret blinked, as if trying to comprehend words she had never imagined hearing. "But that doesn't make sense," Daniel said, a touch of desperation creeping into his voice. "I thought—" "You thought what?" I asked, tilting my head. "That you owned this house? That we owned it?" I let the words sink in. "Daniel, this house was never yours." Margaret's face drained of color. "No," she said quickly. No, that's not possible. That's reality." I finished for her. Daniel stared at me, shaking his head. "But we lived here together. And I let you," I said simply. A beat of silence. And then Margaret did what she always did when things didn't go her way. She got angry. "This is ridiculous," she spat, her voice rising. "You are nothing without my son. You had nothing before him. I had everything before him," I corrected, my voice calm. "And I still do." Daniel exhaled sharply, dragging a hand through his hair. I could see the realization beginning to dawn. This was bigger than just the house. "Claire," Daniel said, voice softer now. "Let's talk this through. Maybe we can work something out." I smiled. "Oh, Daniel," I said lightly. "We already did. That's why you signed a prenup." Margaret gasped. Daniel froze. And just like that, I watched their world shatter. I turned to leave, but not before dropping one last truth. "You wanted to be free of me," I said. "Well, congratulations. You got exactly what you wanted." And with that, I walked away, leaving them standing on my property, realizing, far too late, that they had gambled and lost everything. Margaret stood frozen, her carefully curated world crashing down around her. Daniel, meanwhile, was in pure disbelief. His face was pale, his mouth slightly open, as if he was struggling to process the words I had just spoken. "Claire, we can fix this," he finally said. I almost laughed. "Fix what?" I asked. "Your mother's little scheme? The way you went along with it? Or the fact that you thought you could just walk away and keep everything I built?" Margaret stepped forward, fury radiating from every pore. "You tricked him," she hissed. "You manipulated my son into signing that prenup." I tilted my head, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. "Tricked?" I echoed. "You mean the prenup that Daniel signed willingly? The one that legally protects my business, my assets, and my property?" Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. "Tell me, Daniel," I said, "did you even read it? Or did you just assume, like your mother, that none of this would ever matter?" Silence. That told me everything I needed to know. Margaret's breath came quick and sharp. She wasn't just furious, she was panicking. "This is wrong," she spat. "You're being spiteful. You're tearing this family apart out of pure pettiness." "Am I?" I said, my voice smooth as silk. "Or are you just angry that the game you started didn't end the way you planned?" Margaret's face turned a deep shade of red. "You were never good enough for this family," she snapped. I took a step forward, meeting her glare head-on. "And yet," I said softly, "it's still my name on the deed." The air between us crackled. For the first time in her life, Margaret was powerless, and she knew it. I turned to leave, but Daniel grabbed my wrist. Gently, but desperate. "Claire, please." I paused, looking down at his hand. A year ago, that touch would have meant something. But now? It was nothing more than the final grasp of a drowning man. "You don't have to do this," he said. I made a mistake, okay? I let my mom get in my head, but we can fix this." I studied him for a moment. The man I had once loved. The man I had built a life with. But that man didn't exist anymore. Or maybe he never had. "You don't get to play the victim now, Daniel," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Not after everything. Not after you chose her over me." Daniel swallowed hard. "I was an idiot," he admitted. "Yes," I agreed. "You were." He flinched at my bluntness. Margaret let out an indignant noise, as if she couldn't believe I was speaking to her son that way. I ignored her. "You and your mother wanted me gone," I said. "And I gave you exactly what you asked for. So tell me, Daniel, why aren't you happy?" He looked away, shame settling in his features. I didn't need to hear his answer. I already knew it. "You think this is over?" Margaret seethed. I turned to her. "It is over," I said simply. "You just don't want to accept it." "This house was supposed to be Daniel's," she cried. "But it never was," I corrected. "And neither was anything else you thought you were entitled to." Margaret was trembling now. She had spent years believing she was untouchable, that she could manipulate and control those around her. But standing there, in the driveway of a house that wasn't hers, she finally understood. She had lost. And worse, she had never been in control to begin with. I didn't stay to hear Margaret's last desperate attempts to save face. I didn't care anymore. As I walked to my car, I felt something I hadn't in months. Relief. I wasn't just walking away from Daniel. I wasn't just walking away from Margaret. I was walking away from all of it. From the quiet belittling, from the manipulation, from the constant battle to prove my worth to people who were never worthy of me. I was free. And they were trapped. Daniel, stuck with the consequences of his choices. Margaret, powerless in the empire she had tried to steal. And me? I was just getting started. Margaret wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. 2 days after I walked away from her and Daniel, I received a message. Not from Daniel, from her. "You may have the house, but don't think for a second that you've won. My son will recover. He will find someone better. Someone who actually belongs in this family. Enjoy your lonely little empire while it lasts. I smiled as I read it. Oh, Margaret. Still clinging to the illusion of control. She still believed Daniel had something to recover from. She still thought I had lost. She was about to learn the truth. The hard way. I ignored Margaret's message. I had no reason to respond. But life has a funny way of delivering karma without my help. A week later, a mutual friend, one of the few who had stayed neutral throughout the ordeal, reached out. You won't believe what's happening. I sipped my coffee, amused. Try me. Daniel lost his job. That caught my attention. How? Apparently, Margaret went to his boss. She tried to get him a promotion, saying he deserved it after everything. I almost choked on my drink. Of course she did. Margaret wasn't just overbearing, she was delusional. She had spent years believing that Daniel was entitled to success, that his name alone should carry weight. But the corporate world? It doesn't reward arrogance. What did his boss do? I asked. Not only did they not promote him, but HR started looking into his performance. Turns out he was already under review for underperforming. And with Margaret storming into the office and making a scene, they fired him. I exhaled slowly. South Daniel had lost his home. Daniel had lost his security. And now? He had lost his job. Not because of me, because of her. Margaret had spent years protecting Daniel from consequences, making excuses, smoothing over every failure. But now, she had destroyed him. And I wasn't even finished watching it all fall apart. The next call came 2 days later. This time, it was from Daniel. I let it ring. I wasn't interested. Then a text came through. Claire, please, can we talk? I stared at the message, considering my options. I didn't owe him anything. Not my time, not my pity. But curiosity got the better of me. I answered, Daniel. He exhaled in relief. Claire, His voice cracked. I messed up. I know that. I don't know what to do anymore. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch between us. What do you want me to say, Daniel? I asked. I didn't think this would happen, he admitted. I thought... He hesitated. You thought your mother was right. A pause. Yeah, he whispered. And there it was. The truth. For the first time, Daniel was admitting that he had placed his mother's opinions above everything else. Above logic, above reality, above me. And where had it gotten him? Nowhere. I didn't want to hurt you, he said weakly. But you did. Another silence. Can we meet? He asked. I closed my eyes. There it was. The last, desperate attempt to pull me back. But he didn't want me. He wanted security. He wanted the life he threw away. And I wasn't in the business of saving men from their own arrogance. No, Daniel, I said. We have nothing left to talk about. And for the first time, I heard real panic in his voice. Claire, wait. Goodbye, Daniel. I hung up. I thought that would be the end of it. But Margaret? She wasn't done embarrassing herself yet. 2 days later, she showed up, at my office. Storming past my receptionist, she barged into my private office like she still had authority over my life. This is your fault, she spat, slamming her hands on my desk. I stayed seated, calm, unbothered. What exactly is my fault? I asked coolly. You ruined my son's life. You took everything from him. The house, the security. No, Margaret, I interrupted. I didn't take anything. Daniel gave it all away. She blinked. Excuse me? I leaned forward, my voice even. Daniel chose to listen to you. He chose to believe I was disposable. He chose to walk away. I let the words sink in. But tell me something, Margaret, I continued. When you told him to leave me, when you promised him something better, did you ever stop to think? What if you were wrong? She paled. I... No, I said softly, cutting her off. You didn't. I stood up, slowly. And now you have to live with it. Margaret opened her mouth, but no words came out. Because deep down, she knew the truth. I had never been the problem. She was. She had built Daniel into a man who couldn't stand on his own. She had raised him to believe entitlement was strength. And in the end, it was her own arrogance that had destroyed him. Margaret stumbled backward, suddenly looking much, much older. Get out of my office, Margaret, I said calmly. She hesitated, one last moment of defiance. But in the end, she had no power left. So she left. And as the door clicked shut behind her, I let out a slow, satisfied breath. The storm was over. And I was still standing. Margaret never contacted me again after that day. Neither did Daniel. The silence was deafening, but it was the best kind of silence. The kind that signified freedom. No more manipulation, no more second-guessing myself. No more fighting for a place in a family that never deserved me. I had won. But more importantly, I had grown. The first morning I truly felt free, I woke up to the sound of nothing. No tension in the air, no forced conversations, no passive-aggressive texts. Just peace. And yet, the world kept moving. My business, thriving. My team, expanding. My confidence, unshakable. Funny, isn't it? Margaret had spent years trying to convince me that I wasn't enough. That without Daniel, I would fall apart. That my success was somehow tied to him. And now, while she and her son scrambled to pick up the pieces of their mess, I was too busy building something greater. Months passed, and the whispers of Daniel's downfall never fully stopped. He had tried to rebuild, tried to prove he could rise above the situation. But without me? He struggled. The job market didn't care that he was Margaret's son. The women he pursued weren't interested in a man who had lost everything. And his mother? She had become a pariah. Her meddling reputation ensuring that no one wanted to be associated with her. One day, a former colleague of his stopped by my boutique. You dodged a bullet, she told me. Daniel is, well, let's just say he's not doing great. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to, because I already knew the truth. He had been given everything, and he threw it all away. Meanwhile, I had built everything, and I wasn't done yet. On the 1-year anniversary of my new life, I hosted a small gathering at my flagship boutique. Not to celebrate revenge, not to gloat, but to acknowledge how far I had come. I had spent too many years proving myself to people who never truly valued me. Now, I was valuing myself. No more shrinking. No more waiting for approval. No more fighting for love that was never real. I stood in my boutique, surrounded by strong, independent women. Women who supported me, who understood me. And for the first time, I truly felt at home. That's when I saw her. Melissa. The young woman Margaret had once paraded around as a better option for Daniel. She hovered near the entrance, hesitant, almost embarrassed. I raised an eyebrow, but before I could speak, she did. I owe you an apology, she said softly. I leaned against the counter, waiting. I believed her, she admitted. I believed that you were the problem, that you were disposable. She looked down, and then I saw what she did to Daniel. And I realized that could have been me. I let her words settle. Margaret had wanted me gone because she thought I was beneath them. And now, the very women she thought were better were seeing the truth. You're lucky, I said finally. You got out before it was too late. She exhaled, nodding. I heard about your success, she said. I wanted to see it for myself. I gestured to my boutique, my empire, my legacy. Well, I said with a smirk, welcome to the little shop Margaret tried to destroy. She chuckled, shaking her head. She underestimated you, she said. A lot of people did, I agreed. As the night ended, I stepped outside, looking up at the city skyline. The same skyline I had looked at on the night Daniel left me. Back then, I had been preparing for a battle. Now, I had already won. Not because I had taken revenge, not because I had watched them suffer, but because I had taken my life back. Margaret had wanted me erased. Instead, I had flourished. Daniel had thought he was moving on. Instead, I had moved up. And the best part? I hadn't done it for them. I had done it for me. Margaret once told me I wasn't good enough for her family, and in the end, she was right. I wasn't good enough for them. I was better.
After 12 years of running my father's company, I finally made it worth $75 million. At a family dinner, my dad looked at me and said, smiling, "Your brother will take over now." My heart sank, but I smiled back. The next morning at work changed everything. I still remember the way my father smiled that night, his hand resting proudly on my brother's shoulder, as if he had already made up his mind long before speaking the words that would change everything. "Your brother will take over now." I felt my stomach drop, but years of practice kept my face composed. I smiled back, as if his words didn't pierce straight through me, as if they weren't unraveling 12 years of my life's work in an instant. The dining room was filled with the clinking of glasses, the quiet hum of conversations between extended family and close business associates. This wasn't just a family dinner. It was a celebration, a moment meant to honor everything we had built, everything I had built. My father had started Harper & Company when I was just a child, a modest logistics business that barely stayed afloat in its early years. I grew up watching him struggle to keep it alive, working late nights, sacrificing family vacations, always chasing one more contract to make ends meet. When I was 24, fresh out of business school, he finally let me step in, though I had to fight for that opportunity. And I had done more than just step in. I had transformed Harper & Company from a struggling regional logistics firm into a national powerhouse, expanding operations, securing million-dollar contracts, integrating cutting-edge technology. What was once a small, nearly bankrupt company now stood as an industry leader worth $75 million. And yet, in this moment, none of it mattered. My father had already decided. My brother, Ethan, would be taking over, not me. A slow ripple of approval spread around the table, murmurs of congratulations directed at Ethan. I watched as he lowered his gaze, feigning modesty, though I knew better. Ethan had never been truly invested in the business. He had spent the last decade hopping from one failed venture to another, never quite finding his footing. He wasn't interested in logistics. He wasn't interested in operations. But he was interested in power. I had spent 12 years proving myself, building Harper & Company from the ground up, making every hard decision, every late-night strategy call, every contract negotiation. Ethan had done none of it. And yet, here we were. Still, I swallowed my emotions. I had learned long ago that in this family, showing pain was weakness. I reached for my wine glass, steadying my hand before lifting it. "Smile, Lisa, smile." "To Ethan," I said, my voice smooth, controlled. The guests raised their glasses, oblivious to the storm brewing behind my eyes. My mother cast me a glance from across the table, an unreadable expression, but I knew she understood. Unlike my father, she had always seen the effort I put in, but she wouldn't interfere. She never did. Then there was my father, grinning with that same unwavering confidence, completely unaware that his choice had set something in motion. Ethan met my gaze from across the table, a smirk barely hidden at the corner of his lips. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just my father's decision. Ethan had been waiting for this. He had positioned himself carefully, playing the role of the dutiful son who had finally found his calling. And my father, ever the traditionalist, saw no flaw in his logic. A son should inherit the empire. A daughter, well, a daughter's efforts were always considered temporary. A footnote in history, no matter how hard she fought to prove otherwise. But what they didn't realize, what neither of them had accounted for, was that I had spent 12 years not just building a company, but fortifying my position within it. And tomorrow morning, they would learn exactly what that meant. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed every sacrifice I had made for Harper and Company. The late nights, the missed birthdays, the relationships that crumbled under the weight of my ambition. I had given everything for this company. And now, they expected me to simply step aside? They had underestimated me. By 3 a.m., I was in my home office, my fingers moving quickly across my keyboard. Every contract, every share, every executive agreement. I knew the inner workings of this company better than anyone. Ethan thought he was walking into an easy transition, that by next week, his name would be on the office door, his position secured. What he didn't know was that while my father had been busy with public appearances, and my brother had been busy pretending to learn the business, I had been securing something far more valuable: control. At exactly 8:45 a.m., I stepped into Harper and Company headquarters, just like I had for the past 12 years. The same walls, the same polished floors, the same hum of efficiency as employees settled into their routines. But today was different. Today, I wasn't walking into my office. I was walking into a battlefield. The reception area was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. They knew. The whispers had already started. The news of my father's announcement at dinner had spread like wildfire. Employees glanced at me with hesitant expressions, avoiding direct eye contact, unsure of where their loyalty should lie. I didn't acknowledge them. I walked with confidence, my heels clicking against the marble floors, my posture unwavering. Never let them see you shaken. I entered my office, shutting the door behind me. I had precisely 15 minutes before my father and Ethan arrived, thinking they would step into their new positions as CEO and heir apparent. 15 minutes before everything they had planned crumbled in front of them. I sat at my desk, inhaling deeply, then powered on my computer. The screen illuminated with a list of confidential documents and contracts, ones they had never thought to look at, ones they had assumed didn't matter. I pulled up my ownership records. My hands hovered over the keyboard for a second before I clicked on the file labeled Executive Shareholders Agreement. And then I waited. At precisely 9 a.m., there was a sharp knock at my door. I didn't bother responding. The door swung open, and in walked my father and Ethan, both exuding confidence. His inborn, Ethan's carefully manufactured. My father strode in like a king surveying his kingdom, while Ethan, dressed in an expensive navy suit, gave me a smug, triumphant grin. It took everything in me not to laugh. "Lisa," my father said, in his usual authoritative voice, as if he were doing me a favor by acknowledging me. "I assume you're aware of the transition happening today?" Transition. Interesting choice of words. "I'm aware," I said smoothly, leaning back in my chair. I glanced at Ethan, whose smirk only widened. "Good," my father continued, nodding as if we were all in agreement. "Ethan will be stepping in as the new CEO. We'll need you to help with the handover. Get him familiar with the operations before you officially move on." I arched an eyebrow. "Move on?" I echoed, feigning confusion. "Dad, I think you're mistaken about something." His face twitched in irritation. He was used to my compliance, my ability to quietly fall in line. He wasn't prepared for this. "Lisa," he said, voice tight, as if speaking to a child. "This isn't up for debate. We've already made the decision." I smiled then, a slow, knowing smile. "Oh, I know, Dad," I said softly. "The thing is, you don't have the authority to make that decision." Ethan let out a low scoff, shaking his head. "Lisa, don't make this difficult. We're trying to do this the easy way." I didn't respond. Instead, I reached for the remote control and pressed a button. The large screen on my office wall lit up with a document, the same one I had been reviewing earlier. Executive Shareholders Agreement, signed. August 17th, 2015, signatories. Lisa Harper, James Harper, father, Ethan Harper. My father's face paled slightly. I turned to Ethan. Do you even know what this document is? He crossed his arms, shifting in discomfort. A shareholders agreement? He guessed. I nodded. Yes. And do you know what it says? I tapped the screen, highlighting a crucial clause. This document was drafted when Harper and Company was restructuring. It clearly states that any transfer of executive power, such as appointing a new CEO, requires the approval of all majority shareholders. I met my father's eyes. And I, Dad, hold 60% of the company's shares. The silence that followed was suffocating. My father's expression hardened. That's impossible, Ethan muttered, stepping forward to examine the document. Actually, it's very possible, I said smoothly. You see, over the years, while you were busy failing at every startup you touched, and Dad was busy playing the role of business patriarch, I was doing something else. I leaned forward. I was securing my place. I turned back to my father. Remember when you needed capital for expansion in 2017? You signed over an additional 15% of your shares to me in exchange for my investment. And in 2019, when we had that legal battle, another 10% was transferred under my name as collateral, which you never bothered reclaiming. That, plus my original 35%, makes me the majority shareholder. My father's jaw clenched, but Ethan was panicking. You have to be bluffing, he spat. I pulled out a second document. This is the most recent legal filing with the state. Want to verify? Ethan snatched the paper and scanned it, his face draining of color with each passing second. You can't do this, he stammered. Dad, tell her she can't do this. My father remained silent, because he knew. I had legally outmaneuvered him, and there was nothing he could do about it. I exhaled slowly, standing up. I'm not firing you, Ethan, I said. I wouldn't want to force you into the real job market, but you will report to me, and you will work under my leadership. Otherwise, I gestured toward the door. You're free to leave. Ethan turned to my father, eyes pleading. But for the first time in his life, my father had no answer. No way to fix this, because this wasn't his company anymore. It was mine. The silence in my office was suffocating. Ethan still clutched the legal document in his hand, his fingers white from gripping it too tightly. My father stood rigid beside him, his expression unreadable, but I knew better. He was calculating, trying to find a way out of this. There wasn't one. I had spent years preparing for this moment. Not because I had expected betrayal, but because experience had taught me never to assume loyalty where power was involved. For the first time in my life, my father looked at me as if he didn't recognize me. Perhaps he never had. So that's it? Ethan finally spoke, his voice laced with bitterness. You're just taking everything? I let out a soft, humorless laugh. Taking everything? I repeated, stepping closer to him. Ethan, I built this company from nothing. Every contract, every expansion, every innovation, I made it happen. While you were busy failing upwards, I was keeping this company alive. So no, I'm not taking anything. I leaned in slightly. I'm just keeping what's already mine. Ethan's face twisted in anger, but he had no rebuttal. He knew I was right. And worse, so did my father. He had spent years believing that bloodline mattered more than ability, that his son would inherit what was rightfully mine. He had underestimated me, and now he was paying for that mistake. My father finally broke the silence. You're making a mistake, Lisa. His voice was calm, measured, but I could hear the strain underneath. A family should stick together. Do you really want to burn this bridge? I met his gaze head-on. Dad, I said slowly, you burned this bridge the moment you made your decision without me. His lips pressed into a thin line. Business is bigger than just one person. We can find a solution that works for everyone. I tilted my head slightly, feigning consideration. Oh, I agree. That's why I'm offering you both a choice. I turned to Ethan first. You can stay in the company, I said, keeping my voice smooth, professional. But you won't be CEO. You'll take on an advisory role with limited authority. Your salary will be generous, but you will answer to me. Ethan stiffened, but I didn't stop. Or, I continued, you can walk away. I'll buy out your shares at market value. You can take the money and find a new project to sink your teeth into. My father scoffed. You're acting like you hold all the cards. I smiled. I do. A thick silence followed my words. I let them sit in it. Let them feel what it was like to be powerless. Finally, my father exhaled, shaking his head as if in disbelief. I never thought you'd do this, he muttered. Not to your own family. I felt a sharp pang at his words. Not to your own family. I wanted to tell him that he was the one who had done this, that he had made the choice to push me aside, to act as if I was temporary. But I didn't, because in the end, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I wasn't going to let them take what I had built. Not now, not ever. Ethan stormed out first. Good riddance. I knew my brother well enough to predict his next move. He would go to our relatives, our family friends, painting himself as the victim of corporate betrayal. I didn't care. I wasn't here to win their approval. I was here to win my future. My father lingered for a moment longer, as if waiting for me to change my mind. When I didn't, he gave a slow nod. You've changed, he said quietly. I met his gaze. No, Dad. I just finally stopped pretending. Then he left. I exhaled, sitting back down in my chair. I should have felt victorious. I had fought for my place and won. But as I stared at the empty doorway, I felt something else too. A quiet, lingering ache. A part of me had always wanted my father's approval. Some small, desperate part of me had thought that if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself over and over again, he would finally see me. But the truth was, he had never really looked. And now? Now he had no choice but to see me for what I really was. Not his daughter, not his temporary stand-in. The true leader of Harper and Company. I turned back to my computer, my focus shifting. I had spent 12 years building this company. Now I would spend the next 12 making it untouchable. My father and brother had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, they were the ones who lost everything. For the first time in 12 years, my office felt empty. No phone calls from my father, no passive-aggressive emails from Ethan, just silence. But silence didn't mean peace. It meant the battle had begun. I knew my father wouldn't walk away quietly. And Ethan? He would fight tooth and nail to reclaim what he thought was his birthright. I wasn't naive enough to think this was over. It had just begun. By the next morning, I could already feel the undercurrent of unease within the company. Employees who had greeted me with confidence last week now seemed hesitant, as if afraid to pick a side. A few department heads avoided eye contact. I knew what was happening. My father and Ethan were working the Whisper Network. Old family friends, board members, senior executives. They were sowing doubt, painting me as cold, ruthless, disloyal. Ethan, especially, had taken on the role of the wounded son, betrayed by his own sister. I could imagine him now, sitting in some high-end restaurant, fake sorrow in his voice, as he told our investors how I had stolen the company out from under him. And my father? He wouldn't need to say much at all. Just a heavy sigh, a shaking head, the carefully placed words, I only ever wanted the best for my children. It was calculated and dangerous, because if they managed to turn my board members and top executives against me, they could push me out of my own company, or at least make my leadership impossible. I wasn't about to let that happen. That afternoon, I called an emergency executive meeting. As I stepped into the boardroom, I felt the tension in the air. Half of the room avoided my gaze. The other half watched me too closely, waiting for me to slip. I took my seat at the head of the table. My seat. Let's not waste time, I said, my voice even. I know there have been conversations, behind closed doors, over drinks, in hushed voices. I let my eyes scan the room, pausing on each person for just long enough to make them shift uncomfortably. I also know that some of you are wondering if my leadership is sustainable. A few people tensed. No one spoke. I tapped my fingers against the polished wood table. Let's clear that up now. I pulled up a presentation on the screen behind me. Numbers, data, facts. I built this company from a struggling regional business to a $75 million industry leader. Over the last 5 years, under my leadership, we've seen a 300% increase in revenue and expanded into 6 new markets. I turned to the CFO. Paul, do we have a single financial indicator suggesting this company is in trouble under my leadership? Paul hesitated, then shook his head. Number. In fact, projections show another 20% growth in the next quarter. I nodded. So let's be honest about what's happening here. I leaned forward. My father and brother aren't upset because the company is struggling. They aren't upset because I'm failing as a leader. They're upset because they expected me to step aside and let Ethan take over, regardless of qualifications, regardless of results. The room was silent. Then I dropped the real bomb. I also know that some of you have been contacted in the last 24 hours, offered incentives to push for my resignation. I tilted my head slightly. If anyone here would like to disclose those conversations now, this is your chance. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Then, after a long pause, one of the senior executives cleared his throat. I received a call, he admitted. From your father. He said he was considering making an official appeal to the board. I nodded, unsurprised. And did he offer anything in return for your support? A pause, then a slow nod. There it is. I exhaled, standing up. My father built this company, I said. I won't discredit that, but I took it further than he ever could have, and I will not allow him to manipulate it from the outside. I let my voice drop slightly. Controlled. Dangerous. If he wants a fight, he'll get one. I gathered my papers, looking at each executive in the eye. If anyone here believes my father and brother deserve control, now is the time to make your move. Silence. No one moved. Good. I turned and walked out, my head held high. This wasn't just about keeping my company. This was about making sure they never thought they could take it from me again. That night, I made my own call. Not to a board member, not to an investor, but to the media. By morning, the business section of every major news outlet had the same headline: Power Shift at Harper & Co. Lisa Harper outmaneuvers family in boardroom battle. I had made my move. Now it was their turn. And I was waiting. The morning after my story hit the press, my inbox exploded. Emails, missed calls, messages from journalists, investors, and board members. Some were supportive, some were cautious, but most of them had one question in common. Is it true? I let them wait. I knew the game my father was playing. He had spent decades perfecting the art of public perception. He knew that reputation held weight in business. If he couldn't defeat me in the boardroom, he would undermine me in the public eye. And that was exactly what he was trying to do. By noon, the first counterattack arrived. A press release, neatly crafted, carefully worded, but filled with lies. Harper & Company has always been a family-run business. We are saddened by recent developments, but remain committed to upholding the values that built this company. Changes in leadership are inevitable, and we hope to transition smoothly as we move forward. It was subtle, but I knew what it was really saying. Lisa is reckless. Lisa is unstable. Lisa is not a team player. I wasn't surprised. I was, however, pissed. I sat in my office, watching the news as industry analysts debated my leadership. Was Lisa Harper too aggressive in her takeover? Will her lack of cooperation hurt the company in the long run? Can she recover from this PR disaster? They talked as if I wasn't watching, as if I wasn't already planning my next move. Because if my father and Ethan wanted a public war, I was going to give them one. I didn't release a statement. I didn't call a press conference. Instead, I made one phone call. To an old friend in investigative journalism. "I have something for you," I said, "but you'll need to move fast." An hour later, I sent over documents, emails, financial reports, internal records, evidence that Harper and Company, under my father's leadership, had engaged in questionable business practices over the years, ones I had spent the last decade quietly cleaning up. The story broke within 24 hours. Behind the scenes at Harper and Company, a legacy of hidden debts and financial cover-ups. The article was brutal. It praised my leadership for fixing the company's financial health. It criticized my father's mismanagement from the past. And most importantly, it proved that I was the only reason Harper and Company had survived. And just like that, the narrative changed. The board stopped doubting me. The investors stopped hesitating. And my father? He had nowhere to hide. 2 days later, my father finally called me. I let the phone ring 3 times before answering. "Lisa," he said, his voice tight, "we need to talk." I leaned back in my chair. "Do we?" Silence. Then, finally, a sigh. "You didn't have to do that." I let out a small laugh. "Neither did you." "This company was supposed to be a legacy," he said. "For the family, for both of you." I felt a familiar pang. A tiny, foolish part of me had once wanted that too, but not anymore. "Dad," I said quietly, "if you wanted me to protect the legacy, you should have trusted me with it. Instead, you tried to take it from me." Another long silence. Then he asked, almost reluctantly, "What happens now?" I exhaled slowly. Now? Now, I made sure they could never touch my company again. The war was over. My father had lost. Ethan had disappeared. And I had won. But as I sat in my office, staring out over the city skyline, I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just emptiness. I had spent 12 years fighting for Harper and Company, building it, protecting it, making it stronger than ever before. And yet, the cost of that victory weighed heavier than I had expected. Because while I had secured my position, I had lost something else along the way. My family. The next day, I walked into the office as if nothing had changed. But everyone knew the truth. The whispers had stopped. The doubt had faded. I was no longer just Lisa Harper, the CEO. I was Lisa Harper, the woman who had outmaneuvered her father and brother and come out on top. Some respected me for it. Some feared me for it. And some still waited for me to fall. I let them wait. At noon, my father and I met in the conference room for what would be our final discussion. He looked tired, older, as if the weight of what had happened had finally settled on his shoulders. I waited for him to speak first. When he finally did, his voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. "I'm retiring," he said simply, "effective immediately." I didn't react. I had expected this. "I'll sell my remaining shares," he continued. "I'll keep a small percentage as an investor, but I won't be involved anymore." I studied him carefully. "And Ethan?" His jaw tightened. "He's gone," my father admitted. "Took the buyout. He won't be back." A part of me had known it would end this way. Ethan had never been strong enough to fight his own battles. Once it was clear he had lost, he had done what he always did: run. Still, hearing it out loud made something inside me ache. Not regret, not guilt, just the finality of it all. I nodded. "Understood." My father exhaled, rubbing his temple as if he had a headache. Then, after a long pause, he said something I never expected. "I underestimated you." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing I would ever get. And strangely, I found that I didn't need it anymore. A month later, Harper and Company looked nothing like it had before. The old board members who had aligned themselves with my father and Ethan, gone. The executives who had questioned my leadership, replaced. The company had always been strong under my guidance, but now it was truly mine. And with that control came a new vision. I introduced initiatives my father had always rejected, modernized systems he had called unnecessary, expanded into industries he had been too cautious to explore. Within 6 months, profits soared. Within a year, we had crossed the $100 million mark. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just fighting to prove myself. I was fighting to build something that no one could ever take from me again. A year after everything had happened, I met my father for dinner. It was the first time we had spoken since his retirement. He looked different, quieter. He wasn't angry anymore, just accepting. "I read about the latest deal you closed," he said over his drink. "It was a smart move." I smirked slightly. "I know." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. There was no tension between us anymore. No war left to fight. Only the simple, undeniable truth. He had tried to push me aside, and I had proved him wrong. He lifted his glass. "To Harper and Company," he said. This time, when I clinked my glass against his, I didn't feel anger or resentment, only peace, because I had already won, and I no longer needed his approval to know it. As I sit in my office today, overlooking the city that I built my empire in, I think about the lessons this journey has taught me. That family can be your biggest enemy. That loyalty is a currency, not a guarantee. That power is never given, it's taken. But most importantly, that sometimes the best way to prove your worth is to stop seeking validation and build something so strong that they can never ignore you again. I have no regrets. Harper and Company is mine now, and I intend to make sure no one ever forgets it.